The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and broken promises. I remember that detail most clearly, not the mahogany desk or the way the afternoon light cut through the Venetian blinds, but the smell. That particular scent of things that had been sitting untouched for too long, gathering dust in corners no one bothered to clean. I was sitting across from Mr. Harrison, who'd been my uncle's attorney for 30 years, and he was about to tell me something that would reorder my entire life. "Your uncle's will is quite specific," Mr. Harrison said, adjusting his glasses. His hands trembled slightly as he held the document. I remember thinking that he looked nervous, like he'd had to read this thing 100 times and it never got easier. "Okay," I said. I was confused about why I was even there. My Uncle David had been estranged from our family for nearly a decade. I hadn't seen him since I was 28 years old. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for a few years after that, but the messages had become shorter, colder, until eventually they'd stopped altogether. When I got the call that he'd passed away, a heart attack, peaceful in his sleep, at least that's what they told me. I'd felt sad, yes, but also distant, like mourning someone I'd already forgotten how to know. "He's left you his entire estate," Mr. Harrison continued. "Approximately $3 million plus several investment properties. It's substantial." I felt my breath catch. $3 million. I was a single mother working 2 jobs, barely scraping together enough to keep my kids in decent schools. The idea of that kind of money felt like fantasy. Like someone had just told me I'd won the lottery, or been discovered as a long-lost royalty. I opened my mouth to ask why, to ask if there was some mistake, when Mr. Harrison held up his hand. "However," he said, and I heard the weight of that word settle between us like a stone. "There is a condition." Of course there was. Money doesn't just arrive without conditions. That's not how the world works. He's stipulated that you may access the funds and the property only on one condition. Mr. Harrison paused. He actually paused, like he was giving me time to prepare myself for what he was about to say. "You must sever all contact with your children, completely. No phone calls, no emails, no in-person visits, no communication of any kind. The condition lasts for a period of 10 years, at which point, should you still choose to maintain no contact, the restrictions will be lifted, and the funds are yours unconditionally." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there in that office that smelled like old leather and broken promises, and I felt like I was in a dream where the rules of logic didn't apply anymore. "I'm sorry," I said, as if asking him to repeat it would somehow change what he'd said. "You must not contact your children," Mr. Harrison repeated, his voice gentler this time. "For 10 years. Those are the terms of the will." "That's insane," I whispered. That doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that? Why would he put a condition like that on an inheritance?" "I don't know," Mr. Harrison said, and I believed him. I could see in his face that he'd asked himself the same question 100 times. "Your uncle was very clear about this. He wrote me a letter explaining his reasoning, but the letter is sealed. He asked that I give it to you only if you agree to the terms. And if I don't agree, then the estate goes to charity, all of it. He was very specific about that as well." I left that office without the letter. I couldn't agree to something that insane, that cruel, that fundamentally wrong. I couldn't give up 10 years of my life, 10 years of my children's lives, for money. No matter how much money, no matter how desperately I needed it. But I also couldn't stop thinking about it. My children were Sophie, age 16, and Marcus, age 13. They were good kids, smart, kind, struggling a little bit with the reality of having a mother who was stretched so thin she was practically translucent. I worked at a hospital during the day as a billing specialist. I worked at a bookstore at night, 4 days a week. On my days off, I spent time with them, but even that was tinged with exhaustion. I was always tired. I was always worried about money. I was always acutely aware that I couldn't give them the life I wanted to give them. $3 million would change that. $3 million would mean I could quit one job, maybe both. $3 million would mean college funds that didn't require loans. It would mean stability. It would mean I could finally breathe. All I had to do was abandon my children for 10 years. I didn't tell them about it. I couldn't. How do you explain to your 16-year-old daughter that someone had left you money with the condition that you pretend she doesn't exist? How do you have that conversation without destroying something essential in her? Instead, I called my best friend Carol. I drove to her house late at night after I'd finished my bookstore shift, and I sat in her kitchen while she made tea, and I told her about the condition. "That's monstrous," Carol said immediately. That's the most monstrous thing I've ever heard. I know, I said. You're not seriously considering it. No, I said. But the hesitation in my voice betrayed me. Carol set down her tea. You are considering it. I'm not. I'm just. I didn't know how to finish that sentence. How do you explain that sometimes the rational part of your brain whispers temptations that your heart immediately rejects? How do you admit that you've done the math, calculated the cost, and found yourself unable to dismiss the possibility entirely? You can't do this, Carol said quietly. You can't agree to this no matter how much money it is. I know, I said again, but I also knew something else. I knew that my uncle wouldn't have left this condition without a reason. I knew that he wasn't a cruel man. He was a complicated man, yes, but not cruel. And if he'd decided that I needed to be separated from my children, even temporarily, even impossibly, he must have believed he was doing it for a reason that made sense to him. I went back to Mr. Harrison's office a week later. I asked for the letter. He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for me to come to my senses. He handed me an envelope with my name written in my uncle's distinctive handwriting. I recognized it immediately. That particular way he looped his A's, the slight slant to his letters. I hadn't seen his handwriting in a decade, and seeing it now felt like hearing a ghost speak. I opened the letter in my car, parked outside Mr. Harrison's office with the afternoon sun warming the windshield. Dear Chloe, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're standing at a crossroads. I want you to know that what I've asked of you isn't cruel. It's merciful. And before you dismiss that, I need you to understand something about yourself that you've never been willing to see. You're like me. You've always been like me. We're the kind of people who sacrifice everything for people who don't deserve it. Your mother took advantage of your generosity your entire childhood. You gave her money you couldn't spare. You forgave things that didn't deserve forgiveness. You loved her unconditionally, even when she gave you nothing in return. I see you doing the same thing with your children. I see you exhausting yourself for them, depleting yourself, turning yourself into a shadow of a person so that they can have slightly more comfortable lives. And I see them taking it for granted. I see them treating you like a resource instead of a person. And I know, because I know you, that you're going to continue this pattern until there's nothing left of you. So I'm giving you a gift disguised as a curse. I'm giving you permission to put yourself first. I'm giving you the financial independence to walk away from the life of sacrifice you've been living. But I'm also asking you to step back from your children long enough to discover who you are when you're not drowning in the responsibility of raising them. 10 years might seem like a lifetime, but it's a lifetime where you get to discover what it means to be alive, where you get to rest, where you get to build a self instead of a support system. Your children will survive without you. They're stronger than you think. They're more resilient than you're giving them credit for. And when you come back to them, if you come back to them, you'll be someone worth knowing. I love you. That's why I'm asking this of you. Uncle David. I sat in that car for 2 hours, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but hold that letter and feel it destroy everything I thought I knew about sacrifice and love and what a family is supposed to be. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. I was nothing like him. I wasn't sacrificing myself for my children because I was broken. I was doing it because that's what mothers do. That's what love looks like. Except somewhere deep inside me, in the part of me that still remembered who I was before I became a mother, a small voice whispered, "What if he's right?" I didn't go back to Mr. Harrison's office for another month. For 30 days, I thought about the $3 million. I thought about what it would mean to not be tired for the first time in a decade. I thought about finishing the novel I'd started writing before I had children, the one I'd set aside because I didn't have time or energy or mental space for dreams that weren't about survival. And then I thought about Sophie's face when I'd missed her school play last month because I'd picked up an extra shift. I thought about Marcus asking me if I was proud of him, and me being too exhausted to give him the full attention his question deserved. I thought about the countless moments where I'd been physically present but spiritually absent, worn so thin by the demands of keeping us afloat that I barely existed anymore. Maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. I called Mr. Harrison. "I need to know what happens to the children if I don't contact them," I said. "I beg your pardon?" "My uncle put this condition in the will, but there has to be something else. He wouldn't just abandon them. What provisions did he make for them?" There was a long pause. "He set up a trust fund for each of them. $1 million each to be distributed when they turn 18. Plus college funds, living expenses, all covered. They're more financially secure than most children. They won't lack for anything. I hung up the phone. That night, I sat my children down and I told them the truth. I told them about the will, about the condition, about the choice I was facing. Sophie cried. Marcus got angry. They both asked me the same question, with variations in tone but identical in substance. Are you going to take it? I don't know, I said. And that was the most honest thing I'd said to them in years. Don't, Sophie said. Please, Mom, don't. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I turned down the inheritance. I called Mr. Harrison and I told him that I couldn't agree to the conditions, no matter how much money was involved. I asked him to donate it all to charity, just as my uncle had stipulated. I told him not to send the sealed letter. I'd read enough. I didn't need any more of my uncle's wisdom. What I didn't expect was how much that decision would cost me. The weeks after I turned down the money were strange. I'd made a choice to prioritize my children over financial security, and I'd expected to feel noble about it. I'd expected to feel like I'd passed some kind of moral test. Instead, I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake. Not because I wanted the money. I didn't. But because rejecting it meant confronting the reality of my life head-on, without the fantasy of escape to cushion me. I was still exhausted. I was still stretched thin. I was still barely making it. Except now I didn't have the possibility of things being different dangling in front of me. I'd closed that door deliberately, and the finality of it was suffocating. Sophie noticed the shift in me. Are you okay? She asked one night, while I was doing the dishes after working a double shift. My hands were pruned from hot water, and my back ached from standing all day and I could barely keep my eyes open. I'm fine, I lied. You're not, she said. She was 16, old enough to see through me, old enough to understand that her mother was breaking slowly, the way you break a stick by bending it just a little bit further each day until finally it snaps. The truth is, I was angry. I was angry at my uncle for putting me in a position where I had to choose. I was angry at myself for not being able to provide for my children without that choice. I was angry at my children for existing, for being the reason I couldn't just take the money and disappear into a different life. And I was angry at the world for making motherhood so expensive, so time-consuming, so utterly incompatible with having any kind of life of my own. Didn't tell my children about this anger. Instead, I showed it to them in small, terrible ways. I snapped at them over homework. I made them feel guilty for asking me questions when I was tired. I let my resentment seep into the spaces where my love used to be. And I realized, 6 months after I'd turned down the money, that my uncle hadn't been wrong. I was just like him. I was the kind of person who sacrifices everything and then punishes the people she sacrificed for, because she's angry about the sacrifice she made. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I sat down with my therapist, someone I'd finally started seeing with the money I'd saved by cutting literally every other expense. And I told her everything. I told her about the will, the condition, the choice. I told her about the anger I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest. And I asked her, what was I supposed to do? I don't know, she said honestly. But I know what you did. You chose your children, and then you resented them for being the reason you couldn't be free. So I should have taken the money, I asked. No, she said, but you should grieve what you gave up. You should acknowledge that your uncle offered you something real. Not just money, but permission to stop destroying yourself. And you said no to that. And that's okay. But you have to grieve it instead of taking it out on the people you love. The next night, I had a conversation with my children that changed everything. I told them that I'd made a choice to keep them in my life, and that I didn't want them to ever feel guilty about that. I told them that I was angry sometimes, tired sometimes, stretched beyond my limits sometimes, but I told them that none of that was their fault. And I told them that I was sorry for the ways I'd let that anger and tiredness leak onto them. Sophie cried. Marcus hugged me. And I realized that my children didn't need me to be perfect. They didn't need me to be financially secure or well-rested or fully actualized. They needed me to be real. They needed me to show them what it looked like to make difficult choices and then live with them honestly. I made a new plan. I reduced my hours at the bookstore and picked up a few freelance writing projects that paid better. I wasn't making the kind of money my uncle had been offering, but I was making enough to not feel like I was drowning. I started writing again. Not a novel, not yet, but short stories, essays, fragments of my own experience. I started taking care of myself, not because I needed to be a martyr to my children, but because I deserved to exist as a person separate from being their mother. And I had conversations with my children about my uncle's offer. We talked about sacrifice, about the cost of love, about the line between giving and destroying yourself. I told them about his letter, about his theory that I was sacrificing myself the way he had, the way my mother had. And I told them that I was trying to do something different, trying to find a balance between showing up for them and also showing up for myself. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked one day. "Turning down the money?" I thought about that question carefully. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not because I wish I had taken it, but because I wish I didn't have to choose. I wish financial security and a meaningful relationship with you both weren't mutually exclusive. I wish I could be free and also be your mother. But they weren't mutually exclusive for me specifically. They were just difficult, and I chose difficult. And I'm still learning how to be okay with that choice." A year after I turned down the inheritance, I got a call from my uncle's attorney. Apparently, there was an addendum to the will that he'd failed to mention initially. Once the 10-year period had passed, if I still maintained no contact with my children, the full amount of the estate would be released to me. But there was something else. A letter that was only supposed to be opened if I chose differently. If I chose to keep my children in my life, the letter would explain something that my uncle had never told me. I asked Mr. Harrison to send me the letter. It came in a manila envelope, sealed with my uncle's distinctive handwriting. Inside was another letter, even longer than the first one, explaining something that reframed everything I'd understood about my uncle's original condition. "Dear Chloe," it began, "if you're reading this, you chose your children, and I'm grateful. Because what I couldn't tell you in the first letter is that I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to save you from yourself. I've watched you your entire life, and I've watched you love people who didn't deserve it. Sacrifice yourself to people who took advantage. Put yourself last to everyone else's first. And I've watched it destroy you. I've watched it slowly erase you until there was nothing left of the smart, talented, vibrant girl you used to be. So I offered you a test. Not because I thought you should take the money, but because I wanted to see if you could choose yourself. If you could say no to something, even something as significant as financial security, if it meant betraying what you believe in." You said no. And in saying no, you chose yourself. You said that your integrity matters more than money. You said that your values matter more than comfort. And that's the person I wanted to see you become. I'm sorry that it took an impossible choice to make you understand that you're worth choosing. I read that letter 5 times, 6 times. I cried reading it because my uncle had known me better than I'd known myself. He'd seen the ways I was destroying myself through sacrifice, and he'd tried to save me, not with money, but with a mirror. He'd held up my life and asked me to really look at it. The irony is that I did the thing he hoped I'd do by accident. I chose my children not because I understood his letter, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. And in choosing them, I chose myself, because I realized that the person I want to be is someone who stays, who shows up, who loves even when it's difficult. And that person can't also be someone who abandons her children for money. My children are older now. Sophie is in college, studying literature. Marcus just finished high school. They know the full story, all of it. The will, the condition, my uncle's reasoning, my choice. And we've talked about what it means, about the sacrifice I made and the sacrifice my uncle had made before me. "I'm glad you chose us," Sophie told me recently. "But I also think Uncle David was right about something. You were destroying yourself. You're still not great at putting yourself first, but you're better, and I think that's because you made that choice consciously." She's right. I'm still tired. I'm still not wealthy. I still work hard to make ends meet, but I'm also more alive than I've ever been. I'm writing again. I'm sleeping better. I'm present with my children in ways I wasn't when I was drowning in the responsibility of being their sole support. Sometimes I think about what my life would have looked like if I'd taken the money. Would I have been happy? Probably not. I would have had time and financial security, but I would have had to live without my children. I would have had the freedom my uncle wanted to give me, but I would have spent it drowning in guilt and regret. Instead, I have something better. I have the freedom of choosing the life I'm living, knowing that I chose it eyes open, understanding the cost, and deciding it was worth it anyway. That's a kind of wealth that money can't buy. My uncle's estate is still sitting in a trust, the money accumulating interest that no one can spend. I think about it sometimes, about that $3 million sitting in a vault somewhere, waiting for a condition that will never be fulfilled. And I think about my uncle who spent his life sacrificing himself just like I was doing, and who tried to save me from the same fate by offering me an impossible choice. He taught me something after all, not through what he said, but through what he asked. He taught me that sometimes the most important choices aren't about choosing between two goods. They're about understanding what you're willing to sacrifice for, and what you're not. He taught me that freedom isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you have to choose for yourself. And I choose my children. I choose my life. I choose myself. Every single day I choose it. And that choice, that deliberate, conscious, difficult choice, is worth more than any fortune could ever be.